When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. I felt a strange calm wash over me, even though my heart was breaking quietly inside. I had spent decades raising my son, guiding him, and being part of every small joy and sorrow in his life. And yet, in a single moment, I was told that my presence was no longer wanted. The words echoed in my mind long after she spoke them. Softer than a shout, sharper than a knife. I walked slowly to my room, carrying only a small bag, pretending I had no feelings, pretending I could accept it easily. But inside I was unraveling. Memories of my son as a child, our shared laughter, the nights I stayed awake when he was sick. All of it rushed back in waves. It felt like a lifetime slipping through my fingers. I want to start at the beginning, so you understand who we are, the family I built, and the love I thought would never fade. I was married young. My husband, Imran, and I met in college. He was quiet, kind, and never demanded much. I remember our wedding day clearly. The scent of jasmine in the air, the golden sunlight falling through the windows, and my mother whispering, "Be patient always and love deeply." I carried her words in my heart for all these years. We didn't have much, but what we had we shared with love. Our home was small, but it was warm. Every corner held a story. Our first dinner together, the late-night conversations about dreams, and the silent moments when words weren't needed. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. When my son Farhan was born, I felt a love I had never known before. I held him close, tracing his tiny fingers, whispering promises I intended to keep forever. Every step he took, every smile, every tear, I witnessed it all. Being a mother was not just a role. It became my life's heartbeat. Farhan grew up into a thoughtful boy. He loved to read, to explore, and sometimes he'd sit quietly in the corner, drawing his imagination on paper. I remember the way he'd lean against me, needing nothing but the comfort of my presence. Those moments were fleeting but priceless. I worked hard to create a home that was safe and nurturing. Even when my husband, Imran, had long work hours, I managed the house, the children, and everything in between. It wasn't easy, but I never complained. I believed that family was everything, and I poured all my energy into it. School days came, then teenage years, and the struggles began quietly. Farhan was a good boy, but like any teenager, he had his own battles. Friends who misled him, moments of rebellion, times he would lock himself in his room for hours. I never forced him, never scolded harshly. I tried to be a calm presence, a quiet guide. I listened, held him, and let him know that I would always be there. And then, life moved forward as it always does. Farhan fell in love. A girl named Sana came into his life. She was charming, confident, and to be honest, I liked her at first. She smiled easily, laughed freely, and made my son happy. That's all I ever wanted. But as months passed, small things began to change. At first, it was subtle. Sana would look at me with a polite smile, but never linger in conversation. She would make comments that seemed harmless but left a small sting. "Mom, maybe don't interfere. We'll handle this." She said it lightly, but the tone carried an edge. I dismissed it, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe every mother worries too much. Then came the wedding. Our house was full of laughter, of relatives, of shared joy. But even during those days, I felt a quiet shift. Farhan was happy, yes, but I noticed the way Sana moved through the rooms, as if everything here was already hers. She chose colors, decided arrangements, and made subtle remarks about the house. I said nothing. I told myself, let them be happy. It's their day. After the wedding, things became clearer. Sana wanted the home arranged her way. She suggested changes, questioned traditions, and over time, began to exclude me from decisions I had always been part of. I tried to stay patient. I tried to step aside gracefully, thinking this was normal for newlyweds to claim their space. Yet the tension grew. I could see it in Farhan's eyes sometimes, when he tried to stay neutral. He didn't want to upset either of us, and that made me feel guilty for even existing. There were dinners where I was asked to stay quiet, small family conversations I was subtly excluded from, and gestures that said, "You are no longer in charge here." It hurt, yes, but my love for my son, for my family, always came first. I reminded myself that this was temporary, that life changes, and children grow up. I smiled, nodded, and carried on. Then came the day she asked me to leave. I remember it as if it were yesterday. The sunlight fell softly through the kitchen window. I was washing dishes, humming quietly. Lost in memories, Sana walked in, her tone polite but firm. "Auntie, maybe it's time you step aside. This is our home now." I paused, my hands frozen on the plate. My heart sank, but I didn't cry. I nodded slowly. "Of course," I said. I smiled, though inside everything was breaking. I packed a small bag, left the house with no fuss, and walked slowly to my room. My mind replayed every moment, every small happiness, every tiny gesture of love I had given, and yet, it felt like none of it mattered anymore. As I sat quietly, I thought about life, about love, and about family. I realized that even though they wanted me gone, my memories, my love, and my sacrifices couldn't be erased. I carried them inside me, and I would always carry Farhan in my heart, no matter how distant he might seem. After that day, I moved to a small room in the house that I had once called my sewing room. It was quiet, almost empty, but it became my refuge. I kept a few of my things there. My old sewing kit, a few photographs of Farhan as a child, and the little books. I liked to read when I needed to escape. I spent my mornings by the window, watching the world go by, and my evenings quietly cooking meals. I would sometimes leave outside the door for Farhan and Sana. At first, I tried to make peace with the change. I told myself, this is just a phase. Give them time. Soon they will understand. But time did not heal the small cuts. Each day I noticed tiny shifts that left a hollow ache in my chest. Sana would invite Farhan to her side when I entered the room, as if she was guarding him. Simple conversations were filtered through her, and my advice, once sought and valued, was now brushed off politely, almost as if it were unnecessary. I remember one evening sitting at the kitchen table, peeling apples for a small pie I had baked. Farhan walked in smiling, but there was hesitation in his eyes. Auntie. He stumbled over words. I looked at him and smiled softly, waiting. "It's okay," I said gently. "You don't have to explain." He sighed and sat down beside me. She thinks I should spend less time here. She says I need to focus on our home, on us." I nodded, feeling a quiet sting. I wanted to say, "You will always have me," but I didn't. Instead, I said, "That's all right. I understand. I only want you to be happy." We shared a small silence. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He loved his wife, yes, but he also loved me. I understood that he was caught between loyalty and love, torn quietly, painfully. Life continued this way. Some days, Sana would be pleasant, almost kind, but always with an underlying tension. She would make small decisions without consulting me, rearranging the living room, changing the furniture in Farhan's study, even altering family traditions in subtle ways. Each time I stayed silent. I told myself it was better this way. Less friction, less hurt. Yet the walls of my small refuge were closing in on me. I felt invisible. I was present in the house, but only as a shadow. I could cook, clean, and help if asked, but my voice was no longer part of family discussions. My advice, my experience, the love I had poured into the home, it all seemed to have been replaced by another presence. Remember one rainy afternoon. I was in the kitchen preparing tea when Farhan walked in, shaking off the rain. "Auntie, can you help me with something?" he asked. I looked up and smiled. "Of course, beta. What is it?" He hesitated, then whispered, "She doesn't want me to tell her, but I don't know how to handle this on my own." I nodded slowly. I could see the burden he carried. Even with love in his heart, he was struggling to find his place between his mother and his wife. I guided him gently, showing him solutions, offering support. And yet, the fear of being seen, of being judged, lingered in the room like a silent fog. It was during these quiet moments that I realized something important. My presence, my love, was no longer needed in the way it once had been. I had to find a way to exist quietly, to support my son without overstepping the boundaries that had been drawn. Small tensions began to appear. Sana would comment lightly on my cooking. "Maybe next time, we can try something different, Auntie," She said it softly, but the implication was clear. My dishes, once praised, were now seen as inadequate. She would rearrange things I had lovingly placed, as if my touch in the home no longer mattered. One evening I found myself sitting alone in my room, holding a photograph of Farhan as a toddler. His chubby little hands clutched a toy car. His eyes sparkled with innocence and trust. I traced the photograph gently, whispering to myself, "I only wanted to love you, my child. I never wanted to hurt anyone." I felt tears rise, but I let them fall silently. No one needed to see my sorrow. No one needed to know how deeply I was hurting. And yet, despite all this, life continued. I smiled at Farhan when he passed my room, offered tea in the afternoons, and kept myself busy with small tasks around the house. I told myself that being present quietly, without intruding, was my way of holding on to him. But tension, like a slow-moving shadow, was growing. Misunderstandings began to appear in small ways. Farhan, caught in the middle, would sometimes apologize to me for things he had no control over. Sana would sigh when I tried to offer help, sometimes brushing my hands away gently. "I can manage, Auntie," she would say, smiling, but her tone carried a subtle firmness that was hard to ignore. I began to notice small patterns. Invitations that once included me were quietly omitted. Decisions about family gatherings, holidays, and meals were made without consulting me. Even Farhan's preferences seemed filtered through her lens. I tried to stay calm, but my heart felt increasingly heavy. One evening, as I sat in my small room, I overheard a conversation. Farhan and Sana were speaking softly in the living room. I didn't mean to listen, but the words reached me. "She just doesn't understand. It's our home now," Sana said. I know. But I don't want to hurt her," Farhan replied, voice low. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I didn't want to intrude, didn't want to interfere, but the pain of hearing my own son speak of me as if I were a stranger was sharp. Yet I reminded myself that this was life. Children grow, relationships shift, and sometimes love is expressed through distance, not presence. The days turned into weeks. The quiet pain settled into my bones. I cooked, cleaned, and tended to my small garden outside the window. I wrote letters I would never send, expressing feelings I could not voice. I poured memories into words, each one a testament to the life I had shared with my son. Yet, even in the midst of this silent suffering, there were small moments of joy. Farhan would sometimes bring me a cup of tea, place it gently on the table, and smile. "I thought you might like this," he'd say softly. And in those moments I felt hope. I knew that no matter how distant we became, the bond between mother and child could never truly be broken. It could be strained, hidden, or tested, but it remained, quietly enduring. The tension in the house became a quiet storm. You could feel it in the air, in the way doors closed a little too firmly, in the soft sighs that followed me down the hallway. Every interaction, no matter how small, seemed to carry weight. And yet I stayed quiet, hoping that patience and love would somehow smooth the rough edges. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in my room when I heard raised voices in the living room. I hesitated, unsure if I should go and intervene, but then I heard Farhan's voice, low and strained. "Auntie only wanted to help, Sana. She didn't mean to upset you." "I know, Farhan, but she's still interfering. I don't like it, and I can't just ignore it," Sana said firmly. I froze. The word interfering echoed in my mind. That's all I had been accused of. Simply existing, offering advice, sharing memories, doing the things a mother does. I felt my throat tighten, but I stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't my place to speak. Later that evening, Farhan came to my room. His eyes were tired, heavy with guilt. "Mom, Auntie, I'm sorry. I didn't want you to hear that. She doesn't mean it like that," he said softly. I shook my head, smiling faintly. "It's all right, Beta. Don't worry about me. You are happy, that's what matters." He sighed and sat beside me. I feel torn. I want to be fair to both of you, but I don't know how." I reached out and held his hand. "You can't control everything, my son. Life sometimes asks us to love quietly, to step back, even when it hurts." But even as I said those words, I felt the ache deep in my chest. I had spent my entire life giving love freely, yet here I was, being pushed to the sidelines. The small exclusions continued. Holidays, which had once been full of laughter and warmth, became points of quiet tension. Invitations were made, but sometimes I wasn't included in plans. Simple decisions like what to eat or how to decorate were no longer shared with me. Each time I smiled, nodded, and carried on. One morning, I decided to make Farhan's favorite breakfast, parathas with honey and warm milk. I placed the tray outside his door, hoping he would enjoy the simple gesture. When he came out, he looked surprised, almost guilty. "Mom, Auntie, you didn't have to," he said softly. I shrugged gently. "I know, Beta. I just thought you might like it. Nothing more." He smiled faintly and took the tray. Later, I overheard Sana commenting, "Why does she keep doing this? She knows we don't need it." I felt a quiet sting, but I swallowed it. I told myself that this was the way things were now. My love wasn't unwelcome. It just had to be invisible. However, the misunderstandings were growing. I noticed that Sana had started speaking to neighbors and friends in ways that subtly excluded me. She would mention Farhan's achievements, the home, the celebrations, but never include my role. Invitations would come for everything except me, and even when I was present, it felt as if I were a guest, not part of the family. One evening, Farhan and I were sitting quietly in the garden. The air was cool, and the leaves rustled softly in the wind. "I don't know how much longer I can manage this," Farhan said, voice heavy. "Manage what, Beta?" I asked gently. The way she treats you. I want to stand by you, but I also don't want to upset her. I don't know how to balance it," he said, running his fingers through his hair. I reached out and held his hand. "You don't need to fix this, Farhan. Just be kind. Sometimes love is enough without needing to be seen." He nodded slowly, but the sadness in his eyes stayed. I could feel it deep and heavy. I realized then that the conflict wasn't just between me and Sana. It had begun to weigh on Farhan as well. Small misunderstandings escalated in subtle ways. One evening, I placed a glass of water for Farhan on his study table. Sana walked in, saw it, and said, "Auntie, I told you he can manage on his own. You don't need to do everything for him." Her words were gentle but firm. I felt a quiet ache. My intentions had never been to control, only to care. And yet, in her eyes, even care seemed like interference. I began to withdraw slowly, spending more time in my small room, tending to my sewing and my books. But the heartache was constant. I would sit quietly, writing letters to Farhan that I never sent, pouring my feelings into words. Sometimes I cried softly, sometimes I laughed at old memories, and sometimes I simply stared at the walls, remembering years that had slipped away too quickly. Then came a subtle but sharp turning point. Farhan had a small accident at work. He sprained his ankle. I immediately rushed to help him, offering to care for him, make food, and tend to his needs. When I arrived, Sana looked at me with a tight smile. "Auntie, I've got it. Don't worry about it," she said firmly. I hesitated, but I said nothing. I stepped back, watching as she fussed over him in her way. My heart sank quietly. I wanted to help, to be needed. But even in moments of genuine concern, I was being pushed aside. Farhan caught my eye from the couch. "It's okay, Mom. Auntie?" "Really?" he said softly, his voice filled with quiet guilt. I nodded, forcing a small smile. "I know, Beta. Just rest. I'm here if you need me." But inside, I felt a sharp ache. I realized then that the subtle exclusion had turned into an emotional displacement. I was no longer part of my son's life in the way I had been. My presence, my care, my love, all of it had been quietly replaced. The day it all broke, I remember the sunlight falling softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the living room. But inside, my world felt cold. The ordinary sounds of home, the clinking of dishes, the rustling of papers, the distant hum of traffic, seemed to fade away. All I could hear was the quiet echo of words I never thought I would hear in my own home. It began with a letter. I found it accidentally, tucked between papers on the dining table. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It was from Sana. The handwriting was neat, precise, almost clinical, and yet the words it held were sharp. "Dear Auntie, we appreciate everything you've done, but it's time for you to let go. This is our family now. Please respect our space and step aside permanently." I felt my chest tighten. My hands shook, and I sank into the chair, holding the letter like a fragile bird. I couldn't read it again. I couldn't believe it. All the years of love, care, and sacrifice, gone in a few carefully chosen lines. I tried to breathe slowly, telling myself it was just a letter. It didn't erase the years, the memories, the bond I had with Farhan. But the pain was deep, quiet, and unrelenting. I held my head in my hands, thinking of every bedtime, every scraped knee, every silent night I had spent worrying about him. And now, it felt as if all of it had been replaced. When Farhan came home later that day, I tried to act normal. I cooked dinner, set the table, and greeted him with a smile. But I could see the guilt in his eyes before he even spoke. "Mom, Auntie, I'm sorry. I didn't know she would write that. I didn't want this to happen," he said softly, sitting beside me. I shook my head gently, forcing a smile. "It's all right, Beta. It's her decision. I need some time." Farhan reached out, placing his hand over mine. "I can't believe she would say that. You've done everything for me. Everything." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I know, and I will always do what I can for you, quietly, without causing more pain. That's all I can do now." The days after the letter were heavy. I found myself retreating more into my room, avoiding the living room, the kitchen, the spaces that once held laughter. The house felt different. It was the same walls, the same furniture, but the warmth was gone. My presence was no longer welcome, no longer acknowledged. One evening, I overheard a conversation that cut even deeper. I had stepped into the hallway to grab a cup of water when I heard Farhan and Sana speaking softly in the living room. "I think it's better if she just stays out of our lives completely," Sana said firmly. I don't know if I can do that," Farhan replied, voice strained. "She's my mother. I can't just erase her from my life." "Then you'll have to choose," Sana said, voice low but unwavering. "We can't have her interfering anymore. She needs to understand." I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath me. My heart ached, heavy and raw. My own son, the one I had nurtured and protected, was being asked to choose. And deep down, I knew he would be forced to step aside. That night I sat quietly in my room, staring at the walls. I thought about every memory, every smile, every moment of love, and I realized that no matter how much I had given, no one could see it anymore. I had been replaced, not violently, not cruelly, but quietly, invisibly, in a way that made me feel as if I were fading away. The turning point came the next morning. I had prepared breakfast as usual, hoping to share a quiet moment with Farhan. I placed the tray on the table, heart heavy, and stepped back. Sana came into the kitchen, her expression calm but firm. "Auntie, you don't need to do this. Please step aside. Let us handle everything from now on." I took a deep breath. I could have argued, protested, or cried, but instead I smiled softly, forcing the warmth I didn't feel. "Of course," I said quietly. "If this is what you want, I will respect it." Farhan looked at me, eyes wide, torn. "Mom, please," he began, but I held up my hand gently. "It's all right, Beta. You have to live your life. I will be okay." I packed a small bag that morning, taking only the essentials. My hands trembled slightly as I zipped it closed. I walked through the house one last time, noticing every corner, every detail I had loved, every small memory etched into the walls. I left the house quietly. No words of protest, no arguments, just a calm acceptance of what had happened. My heart was heavy, but I told myself that love sometimes means stepping aside, even when it hurts. Outside, the air was cool and still. I walked slowly, carrying the weight of years of love and devotion. And yet, despite the pain, I felt a strange clarity. I realized that my role in Farhan's life had changed. But it was not over. Love does not vanish when presence is limited. It endures quietly, in memories, in small gestures, in the bonds that time and distance cannot sever. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry. Not in anger, not in shame, but in release. The tears were slow, silent and cleansing. I sat on a small bench under a tree, feeling the wind on my face, and whispered softly to myself, "I will be okay." Love doesn't disappear, even when it changes shape. The days after I stepped aside were heavy, yet strangely calm. I no longer moved through the house as part of its rhythm. I existed in the quiet corners, observing without interference. It was painful at first. Every sound of laughter, every clink of cutlery, every shared glance between Farhan and Sana reminded me of my absence. But over time, I began to notice something else. Freedom. Freedom not from love, but from the constant ache of trying to balance my presence in a space where I was no longer fully welcome. For the first time in decades, I was alone in my thoughts. Alone, yet not lonely. I carried my memories, my care, my love with me. And that became enough. I spent mornings tending to my small garden. I planted marigolds and jasmine, watching them grow, knowing that life continues even when hearts are heavy. I cooked simple meals for myself, slowly experimenting, tasting spices in ways I hadn't before. Small joys began to return. The warmth of sunlight on my face, the smell of rain on earth, the sound of birdsong outside my window. One evening, Farhan came to visit me. He did not knock. He simply entered softly, as he always had when he needed comfort. He sat across from me, his eyes heavy with the weight of what had passed, but also glimmering with love. "Mom, Auntie, I wanted to see you," he said quietly. I smiled, gesturing to the chair beside me. "I'm glad you did, Beta. How have you been?" He sighed, sitting down. "It's hard, Auntie. I miss having you around. But I also understand why things had to change. I don't want to hurt anyone, and I don't want you to feel unwelcome." I reached across the table and held his hand. "You don't need to explain, Farhan. Love sometimes asks us to step back, not out of anger, but out of respect and care. That's what I'm learning now." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Auntie, for everything." I shook my head, smiling faintly. "There is nothing to be sorry for. Life moves forward and we do what we must. You are building your life. That's all that matters." We sat in silence for a long time. The quiet was not heavy this time. It was comforting, filled with the unspoken bond that had existed between us for decades. I realized that stepping aside had not ended our relationship. It had transformed it. Over the following weeks, I began to notice subtle ways in which Farhan still included me in his life. A phone call in the morning to ask about my health, a small bouquet of flowers left on my table. The way he paused in conversation to share news he thought I would like. These gestures were quiet, often overlooked by others, but they mattered profoundly to me. Sana, too, began to change slowly, subtly. Perhaps she noticed that the sharp edges of exclusion were unnecessary. She began to ask questions about small things, like recipes or family traditions, in ways that felt respectful. There were still boundaries, yes, but there was also space for understanding. I found myself forgiving, not because I had to, but because holding on to hurt served no purpose. Forgiveness became a quiet, internal act, an acknowledgement that life moves forward, that relationships evolve, and that love can endure even when it takes new forms. One afternoon, as I sat in my garden, I thought about all the years I had spent raising Farhan, guiding him, loving him unconditionally. Realized that the essence of motherly love is not possession or control, but presence in whatever form is needed, sometimes near, sometimes distant, sometimes quiet, sometimes visible. I remembered my own mother's words from decades ago. "Be patient always, and love deeply." They echoed in my mind now, more meaningful than ever. Patience had brought me through heartbreak. Deep love had allowed me to accept change without bitterness. In time, I began to write letters again. But these were different now. Not letters to express sorrow or longing, but letters of reflection and gratitude. Letters to Farhan, expressing my pride in the man he had become, the life he was building, and the love I would always carry quietly in my heart. Started sharing small moments with others in the community. Friends, neighbors, distant relatives. I spoke of life, of challenges, of lessons learned. I realized that my story, my experiences, could help others navigate love, loss, and change. There was purpose in sharing, a subtle healing in connecting with others without the weight of expectation. One evening, Farhan visited again. He brought tea and sat across from me as he always did. "Mom, Auntie, I wanted to thank you," he said softly, "for understanding, for being patient, for loving me always, even when it was hard." I smiled, feeling warmth bloom quietly in my chest. "You don't need to thank me, Beta. Love asks nothing in return. That's the gift it gives." He nodded and we sat in silence, sipping tea, letting the quiet fill the space between us. No words could fully express the bond we shared, but it did not need them. It existed quietly and enduringly, like the roots of a tree deep underground. Time passed. The ache of displacement softened. I learned to live with the quiet, to find joy in small things, and to embrace love in its evolving forms. I realized that life does not end when roles change. It transforms, offering new ways to connect, new ways to love, new ways to grow. And so I continued. I tended my garden, read my books, wrote my letters, and quietly celebrated the life I had built. Not just with Farhan, but with myself. I learned that stepping aside does not mean stepping away from love. It means holding it gently, letting it breathe, letting it endure even when unseen. Years have passed since that day when I stepped aside. Life has moved forward quietly, gently, and sometimes in ways I never expected. Farhan has grown into the man I always knew he could be. A kind, thoughtful, and patient soul. Sana and I have found a way to coexist, not as friends, but as family who respects each other's space. It took time, patience, and understanding, but the tension that once felt like a storm has softened into calm. I spend my days in the small home I've made for myself. I tend my garden, read and write letters that capture memories and reflections. Occasionally, Farhan comes by, sometimes with tea, sometimes with a story from his day. We share small moments of joy, laughter, and quiet connection. And in those moments, I feel the bond between us, strong and unbroken, even if it looks different than it once did. I have learned that love is not ownership. Love does not demand presence, recognition, or control. Love is enduring, quiet, and patient. It survives absence, misunderstanding, and distance. Stepping aside was the hardest act of love I have ever done, but it was also the most profound. In letting go, I found a new kind of peace. Sometimes when I sit in the garden, I think about the life I have lived. I think about the moments of joy, the struggles, the heartbreak, and the quiet victories. I realize that every experience has shaped me. Every tear has taught me patience, and every act of love, seen or unseen, has created a life worth living. And so I have learned to carry love gently, to hold it in my heart without demanding it be returned or recognized, to accept change with grace, and to know that, even when life asks us to step aside, our love can endure quietly, like the roots of a tree, unseen but steadfast. If there is one thing I wish for anyone listening to my story, it is this: love deeply, give freely, and have the courage to step back when life asks you to. Trust that what is meant to endure will endure. Trust that even in absence, love can remain, quietly shaping hearts and lives, unseen but never lost. Life is full of endings, yes, but it is also full of beginnings. And sometimes, the most profound love grows not in being at the center, but in quietly holding space, letting others live their journey, and finding your own peace along the way. The years that followed were quieter than I had imagined, but in that quiet, I discovered parts of myself I had almost forgotten. I had spent so long being a mother, a caretaker, a guide, that I had rarely considered who I was beyond those roles. And now, in the gentle spaces of my life, I began to explore that. I started small, morning walks in the garden, reading books that had been waiting on my shelves for years, learning to cook dishes I had never tried. At first, these were distractions from the ache of absence, but slowly they became joy. I realized that life could hold love, even when it had taken a different shape than I had expected. Sometimes I met friends for tea, people from the neighborhood, distant relatives I had lost touch with, or even acquaintances from years ago. I listened to their stories, shared my own, and found that there was a quiet power in storytelling. My experiences, my lessons, my pain, and my love. All of it mattered beyond the walls of my home. I could share it without expectation, and the act of sharing became healing. Farhan continued to visit. At first it was awkward, careful. He would enter quietly, almost afraid to disturb the space I had built for myself. But over time the visits became natural. He would sit beside me in the garden, sharing stories of work, small victories and even frustrations. I listened, occasionally offering advice, sometimes simply nodding. The bond we had, though different, remained strong. Sana too gradually softened, not suddenly, not completely, but there were small gestures, a question about a recipe, a polite acknowledgement of a story from the past, a brief smile. It was not friendship, but it was peace. And that, I realized, was enough. In this period, I also began writing letters, not just to Farhan, but to myself. Letters of reflection, of gratitude, of forgiveness. I wrote about the love I had given, the mistakes I had made, the lessons I had learned. Some letters I burned, others I kept, tucking them into a small wooden box in my room. Each letter was a reminder that life, though sometimes painful, held meaning and beauty. I also began volunteering in small ways, helping neighbors with errands, reading stories to children in the community, or cooking for those in need. Giving without expectation, helping without recognition. It filled a part of my heart I had not realized was empty. I discovered that love, when given freely, expands beyond family, beyond home, beyond self. It becomes quiet power, shaping the world around you, even when unseen. I remember one afternoon vividly. Farhan came to visit, holding a small bouquet of marigolds. "For you, Mom." "Auntie," he said softly, placing it beside my chair. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in months. "Thank you, Beta," I said gently. "The garden is brighter because of you." It was in moments like these that I realized something profound. Absence does not erase love. Distance does not weaken it. Stepping aside did not make me less a mother. It simply changed the way I could express love. And that, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of all. Now, as I sit quietly in my garden, watching the sun dip low in the sky, I reflect on all that has passed. Life has taught me that love is patient, love is enduring, and sometimes the most profound acts of love require letting go. I think of Farhan, of Sana, of the years I spent shaping the life of my family. I do not regret any of it. Even the pain, even the heartbreak, even the moments when I felt invisible. They were all part of the journey that brought me to this peace. Have learned to carry love gently, to hold it in my heart without demanding acknowledgement, to accept change with grace, and to know that stepping aside does not mean stepping away from life or from love. It means holding space, quietly, and letting others grow while you grow as well. If there is one thing I could share with anyone listening to my story, it is this. Life is full of changes. People come and go. Roles shift. But the love you give, the care you offer, the patience you hold, these are never lost. They endure in memory, in small gestures, in quiet moments of connection. I look at my garden, at the flowers blooming softly, at the leaves rustling in the wind. I smile. Life is not perfect, but it is beautiful. It teaches, it challenges, and it heals, if we let it. And in that quiet healing, in that gentle acceptance, we find strength, peace, and hope. Love is not measured by presence alone. It is measured by the quiet endurance of the heart. And in that, I have found my life, my purpose, and my joy. Life does not stop when a chapter ends. It only becomes quieter for a while. After stepping aside, my world became small. A single room, a small garden, a few books, a kettle that whistled every morning. At first, I thought this quiet would break me. I was used to noise, footsteps, questions, requests, voices calling my name. Now there was only silence. In the beginning, silence felt heavy. It pressed against my chest. It reminded me of everything I had lost. I would wake up before sunrise, sit on my bed, and wait. Wait for a sound that never came. Wait for someone to knock. Wait for a role that no longer existed. Some mornings I would whisper, "Who am I now?" For years I was Farhan's mother. I was the heart of the home. I was needed. Now, I was just me. It took time to accept that. I started walking every morning. Slow steps, deep breaths, watching the sky change colors. I noticed small things I had ignored for years. The way birds waited for crumbs, the smell of wet soil after rain, the sound of leaves brushing against each other. Nature did not rush. It did not grieve. It simply continued. And slowly so did I. One afternoon, an old neighbor, Mrs. Halima, stopped me. "You walk every day now," she said kindly. "Would you like to sit with us sometimes? We drink tea in the evenings." I hesitated. For years, my world was only my family. I had forgotten how to belong anywhere else. But that evening I went. We sat on plastic chairs outside her house. Simple tea, simple talk. They spoke about children, health, small joys, small worries. No one needed me to fix anything. I was just present, and that felt strange, but also peaceful. Days passed. I began helping a little. One woman needed help reading a letter. Another asked me to watch her child for a few minutes. Someone else wanted to learn a recipe. Each small act gave me a reason to wake up. Not as a mother, but as a human being. Not as a caretaker, but as a human being. Farhan still visited. Sometimes once a week. Sometimes once in 2 weeks. Each time he hugged me gently. "Are you okay?" he would ask. And for the first time I could say honestly, "Yes, Beta, I am learning to be." I no longer cried every night. I still missed him. I still missed the life I had. But the pain was changing. It was no longer sharp. It became soft, like an old scar. Still there, but no longer bleeding. One evening Farhan told me something. "We are expecting a baby." For a moment my heart stopped. A grandmother. Joy rushed through me. Then fear followed. Would I be pushed further away? Would I only be a name? I smiled. "That is beautiful news," I said softly. He held my hand. "I want you to be part of this," he said. "I don't know how yet, but I do." That night I cried again, not from pain, but from hope. For the first time in a long while, I felt that my story was not over. It was simply changing its shape. When Farhan told me about the baby, something inside me shifted. For years I had been learning how to live without being needed. I had taught myself how to breathe in quiet, how to find purpose in small things. But the word baby woke a part of my heart that had been sleeping. That night I lay awake. I imagined tiny fingers, soft cries, a warm body resting against my chest. Then another thought followed. Will I be allowed to love this child? I did not ask Farhan. I did not want to place another burden on his heart. Instead, I prayed silently. Let me be close, even if only a little. Months passed. Sana's pregnancy was not easy. She was tired, often unwell. Farhan looked worn. One evening he called me. Auntie, can you come? Just for a little while? She is not feeling well. I arrived quietly. Sana lay on the bed, pale and restless. She looked at me, not with anger, not with coldness, with exhaustion. I walked to her side. Drink this, I said gently, handing her warm water. She did not refuse. That was new. In that moment, I saw her not as someone who had replaced me, but as a woman afraid of becoming a mother. Just like I once was, I stayed, not as an intruder, not as competition, but as silent support. I cooked light meals. I washed dishes. I spoke little. Sometimes Sana would look at me, as if she wanted to say something, but the words never came. When the baby was born, Farhan called me with trembling joy. It's a girl. My knees weakened. A granddaughter. A new beginning. I did not rush. I waited. Hours later, Farhan came. Please, come see her. In the hospital room, Sana held the baby. Her face was tired. Her eyes full. She looked at me. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then she said softly, Would you like to hold her? My hands shook. She placed the baby in my arms. So small, so warm. Tears fell on the child's tiny blanket. In that moment, I was not forgotten. I was needed. Not as the center, not as authority, but as love. Sana watched me, not with fear, not with jealousy, with something new, understanding. The baby opened her eyes and wrapped her tiny fingers around mine. I whispered, I am here. And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. After the baby came, life found a new rhythm. Not loud, Not dramatic, just gentle. They named her Ira. Ira cried softly, like she was unsure about the world. Every time she made a sound, Farhan rushed. Sana watched her with tired eyes full of wonder. I stayed in my small home. I did not move back. I did not ask. I waited. Some days Farhan brought Ira to visit me. He would place her on my lap and say, "Talk to her, Ami. She likes your voice." I would speak slowly. Tell her about birds, about rain, about the way the world can be kind. Sana did not stop him. That itself was a gift. One afternoon she came with them. She stood at my door, holding the baby. I was nearby. She said quietly, "I thought maybe we could have tea." I nodded. We sat in silence at first. Ira slept in her arms. Sana spoke after a while. "I was afraid," she said. "Not of you, but of myself." I listened. I didn't know how to become a mother. I thought if I failed, everyone would see it. Her eyes filled. "And you made it look easy." I shook my head gently. "It was never easy," I replied. "I was only pretending I knew." She looked surprised. "I thought you were strong." "I was scared every day," I said. "But I loved more than I feared." She lowered her eyes. "I thought you would take my place." I smiled softly. No one can take a place in a heart. Love only makes more room. Her shoulders relaxed. In that moment, we were no longer rivals. We were two women learning the same role, in different seasons of life. From then on, she called me sometimes. "Can you come for an hour? I need rest." "Can you hold her while I shower?" I never stayed too long. I never gave advice unless asked. I learned a new way of being present. Not above, not inside. Beside, Ira grew. She learned my voice. When I held her, she became calm. Sana noticed. "She is peaceful with you," she said once. I answered gently. "She feels safe." "That is all." Farhan watched us. His eyes held relief. One evening, he said quietly, "Thank you for not leaving us." Even when you stepped away, I touched his hand. I did not leave. I only learned where I truly belong. And for the first time, I understood. Sometimes love is not about holding tight. It is about knowing when to loosen your grip, so others can grow. I was no longer the center of the home, but I was still part of the circle, and that was enough. Years pass quietly when the heart is at peace. Ira is 5 now. She runs into my arms when she sees me. She calls me Nani in a soft voice. She tells me her secrets. Sometimes she says, "Nani, I will stay with you forever." I smile and kiss her hair. "You must grow, little one," I whisper. "The world is waiting for you." I no longer feel afraid of being replaced. I have learned something life only teaches through pain. No one can take the love you gave honestly. Sana has become a beautiful mother. Not perfect, but real. Sometimes she asks me, "How did you know what to do?" I always answer the same way. I didn't. I only loved. Farhan visits often. Not from guilt, from connection. We talk like adults now, not like a child and a mother. One evening he said, "You taught me how to be gentle." I looked at him. "And you taught me how to let go." We both smiled. I still live in my small home. I still walk every morning. I still drink tea in silence. But the silence no longer hurts. It feels full, full of memory, full of growth, full of understanding. I was once the center of a home. Then I was asked to step aside. I thought it meant I had lost my place. But I was wrong. I did not lose my place. I found my true one, not above others, not behind them, but within myself. And now I know. Sometimes life removes you from a room, so you can finally hear your own heart. And when you learn to listen to it, you become whole again.